I think the furthest I've ever been, and I'm a traveler, is death. That is a journey that is unsurpassed in my life. It was definitely from one place to another with a high adventure on the other side.
That is Peter Panagore, today's guest, who shares the incredible story of his own death and his return from the beyond. And look, no matter what you believe or what you don't believe, I encourage you to give this show a listen. Just be present, keep an open mind. I'll share a bit more about near-death experiences and why I think they're important stories to share. For now, get ready to go on the biggest journey of all, the journey to the beyond. Welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend.
You're listening to the Zero to Travel podcast, where we explore exciting travel-based work, lifestyle, and business opportunities, helping you to achieve your wildest travel dreams. And now your host, world wanderer and travel junkie, Jason Moore.
I went down this tunnel, and in this tunnel, there were all these doorways that led to all the other tunnels from all the other doorways, and they were all choices that I could make in my life. And then I was back outside my body, looking at it dangling off the cliff.
Just another little snippet of this amazing story you're going to hear today. Hey, it's Jason with ZeroToTravel.com. Welcome to the show, my friend. Thanks for being here. Thanks for hanging out, letting me bring a little travel into your ears today. This is the show to help you travel the world on your terms, to fill your life with as much travel as you desire, no matter what your situation or experience. As you heard at the top, Peter Panagore on the show today. You can find his work over at peterpanagore.love. We'll link up to that. And he has a book called Heaven is Beautiful, How Dying Taught Me That Death is Just the Beginning. And one of the things we talk about today is how it's been so difficult for him to capture this experience with language because it doesn't really translate to the English language, what he experienced. And he does a wonderful job anyway. And that's why I was excited to have him on, because when I started diving into the rabbit hole, I went down the near-death experience rabbit hole, just to give you a little background. It turns out, Peter had this compelling story, and he tells it so well, and it's been heard by millions of people through, YouTube interviews he's done, things like that. But I was thinking, does this make sense for the podcast? To me, it does. I'm fascinated by it. And we talk about travel. I mean, is there any bigger journey we take than the journey to the other side? And whatever your beliefs, I can almost guarantee you're going to be captivated by this tale. And this is not meant to be about religion or anything like it. This is just one man sharing his first near-death experience. He's actually had two, and you're going to hear the second one in part 2 of this podcast, which I'll publish later this week. But you're going to hear the first one today. And after I was down this rabbit hole, I thought, well, listen, if there's humans out there who have died and actually returned to tell about it, I'm curious. I want to hear those stories. And it turns out I personally found a lot of hope and a lot of comfort in these stories. And, there are a lot of common objections when you're talking about near-death experiences. I mean, just for an example, one is, this is the brain doing the chemical, sort of like injecting the last chemicals, and this is all a hallucination and these things. But I kind of went back and I found this book, which was sort of the foundation for this entire near-death experience movement. It was written by Raymond Moody, who is, quote, the father of the modern NDE, near-death experience. And the book he wrote, called Life After Life, was originally published in 1975. It is, quote, the groundbreaking study of 100 people who experienced, quote, clinical death and were revived, and who tell in their own words what lies beyond death. And, recent medical technology means that probably more people than ever in history have been revived after dying. I mean, decades ago, people didn't talk about these experiences for fear of what others would think about them. That's something that comes up during our conversations. But Raymond's book, when it was published, and with the rise of the internet, more and more people started feeling comfortable coming forward and sharing their story. And turns out there are some fascinating common occurrences that you come across. As I mentioned, Raymond in his book, it's 100 different cases. And so he identifies these sort of common things that people from all walks of life have experienced when they retell these tales. And I've seen and heard near-death experience stories from atheists. I've heard it from, super religious people. You've heard it from a lot of different places, and they vary, but there are some commonalities that seem to come across. And I don't know, I found it pretty fascinating. And, I don't have any answers here, but I love talking to Peter, hearing about his experience. And if you're curious, I encourage you to do what we all should do more of, I would say, is just dig a little deeper. Like, for example, I read Raymond Moody's book. I've done some research on this stuff, tried to look at some of the science behind it because I was curious. And it's so easy for us to take sort of things at face value, especially in this day and age where we can scroll through like 1,000 posts on social media in 5 minutes and just gloss over it or write something off or agree with something and be in our little bubbles instead of taking the time to actually dive in. So if you're curious about this whole thing, maybe you'll go down the rabbit hole too. Otherwise, just enjoy this thoughtful conversation. And what's also interesting is that Peter's story is rooted in travel, as his death occurred during an adventurous trip that he took ice climbing with a friend. So I hope you enjoy it. Stick around on the back end. I'll leave you with a quote plus some final thoughts. Thanks for listening, and enjoy my chat with Peter. Cheers. Peter Panagore, welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend. What a pleasure.
Hey, Jason, I am so thankful that you asked me from across the Atlantic to meet you this morning or this evening, depending on where you are.
I first heard your story on YouTube somewhere when I went down the near-death experience rabbit hole that runs deep, man. It runs deep. So then I had to buy your book and read it. The book, Heaven is Beautiful, How Dying Taught Me That Death is Just the Beginning. Yeah, then I thought, well, I got to reach out to Peter. We got to have him on the show. This is something we've never talked about on the show. You might think, well, what does this have to do with travel? I mean, kind of everything in a way. Doesn't death have to do with life? It all kind of goes hand in hand. What was fascinating to me after reading your book, and then afterwards I read the Life After Life book, which is written by Raymond Moody, who coined the term near-death experience. It covered 100 different people who experienced quote-unquote clinical death. And then there were a lot of commonalities there, and some of those appear in your story. I guess where to start is a tough question, but in terms of your work, you say you're a spiritual counselor. What does a spiritual counselor do?
Well, I help people integrate their wild, mystical experiences. So what I mean by that is that there is a long history globally within major religious traditions, but always on the edge of them, of people who have what are termed unitive mystical experiences or any other kind of mystical experience, out-of-body experience, an after-death visitation, something strange and out of the ordinary that changes the course of their life, during which some kind of wisdom is bestowed on them, and it's often love. It's often, in the case of a person who is visited by someone they love who's dead, it's often forgiveness, love, joy, understanding of the deceased's well-being, and it changes the course of their grief. And it's not something that is imaginary. It is something that is so powerful that the direction that they head in their life, and in particular in the cases of grief, it relieves a burden and it changes who they are and their understanding of what happens to them after they die. And to your point about traveling, I think the furthest I've ever been, and I'm a traveler, is death. That is a journey that is unsurpassed in my life. It was definitely from one place to another with a high adventure on the other side.
It's the ultimate trip.
It's the ultimate trip, right?
Which people are going to hear about today. In terms of your work and the mysticism, as you kind of laid out what mysticism, or a mystical experience, I should say, is in some ways, which is kind of hard to define.
Oh, I can define it for you.
Yeah, if you want to, we can start there, because then I want to get some practical tips from you on tuning into these experiences. So people are listening. I think, I don't know if it's safe to say that maybe everybody's had one of these types of experiences at some point, maybe some seemingly more extreme than others. You can share a bit about what a mystical experience is. And then I want to get your advice on interpreting them, because that's in the integration, that's the hard part. How do you pull out the meaning? Because they're kind of mysterious in some ways.
They are. They often come without language. Most of the time, there's no language involved. And because there's no language involved, the message is, well, it's not cognitive. The message is deeper than that. And so let me begin with a definition. There was a man named William James who was maybe the most intelligent father of psychology in American history, and he was a professor at Harvard. And he wrote this book back at the turn of the last century called Varieties of Religious Experience. And in that book, he has a chapter on mystical experience, and he defines mysticism as having four components of mystical experience. It's transient, so it has a beginning and an end. It's noetic. It leaves a gift that is, number three, ineffable. It's unspeakable. And so noetic, transformative, passive. Oh yes, passive. It happens to you. You don't make it happen. And these experiences, they are so out of the norm of living. And you're right, there's a huge percentage of the population who have these, but they don't talk about them because they are so far out of normal experience. And so there was a study done at the International Association for Near-Death Studies, which is a consortium of universities, primarily in North America, but elsewhere as well, university professors, including Europe, who researched near-death experience. And in a study that was done 2 years ago, 60% of 350 people surveyed who were grieving, 60% of grieving people have an after-death communication. That is a huge number. That's a huge number. That means that more than half the population has this experience that after someone they love dies, comes to visit them, and nobody talks about it. Well, few people talk about it because you can't prove it, even though it changes the direction of your life. But it leaves a person with a new understanding of themselves and death. And so it has a major impact on society. But because of religious repression of mysticism, and they used to kill people who were mystics, and it's not just Christians who did that, or isolate them into monastic or convents. Jewish people did that. Islam did that. Everybody. Lots of people who claimed that they had a divine experience outside of doctrine and dogma were repressed and sometimes killed. The societal pressures against talking about mystical experience are, well, you don't talk about it at a cocktail party. You don't mention it to somebody at the gym because they'll think you're crazy. So there's this like a public secret. Everybody, 60%, 70% of the people have some kind of experience, but out of fear, we don't talk about it.
Yeah, and you can even think there's probably a percentage of those that may not be interpreting what is a mystical experience as that. For example, if somebody they know is passed on and that person appears in their dreams and tells them something, I think they might just chalk it up to, well, that was just a dream. Is that a mystical experience or just a dream? I'm using air quotes. I don't know. I'm not in the position to say. You are, I'd say, in that situation. But so there's that element too. Yeah.
I think it depends if the message in the dream transforms your grief. If your grief the day before you have the dream is different than the grief you have the day after, then the messaging that came to you left this noetic knowledge, this understanding that's beyond words of well-being. So, and that's most people, many people. Is my loved one okay? Are they still in existence? Because of religion, do they go to hell? Are they in eternal damnation? Which most near-death experiences are like, there's no such thing as eternal damnation. This just doesn't exist. But people are worried about that. And if this dream visitation is transformative, if it has after effects, and that's one of the measures that have come out over the last 40 years, that there are things that are after effects that show that the event happened. And what I mean by that is that in the near death experience community, we have a high divorce rate. We have a high divorce rate because the person who dies and comes back is so different than the person who they were the day before, that marriages end. And it has a lot to do with a persistent experience of non-attachment. It has to do with a re-evaluation of values and decisions on how to handle finances and the direction of a person's life. Those are major things that happen during NDEs, but lots of people have these minor mystical experiences that they don't, because there isn't a cultural context for them, there's nowhere to talk about it, that they can assess what happened to them and understand it, that they often chalk it up to, as I like to think about A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, when Scrooge is sitting in front of the fireplace and Marley shows up and he says, "There's more about you of gravy than grave." And what he means is he's having indigestion and it's not real. But it turns out it was real for him.
Well, I know you've shared this story many places, many times, and I would love for you to share the story of your first near-death experience here so people can, if they've never heard one before. I found yours very compelling and gripping. Also, there is a travel element to it, which was another thing that kind of drew me to your story. Before you dive in and share it, I'm just wondering, do you find in the retelling of it over the years that what keeps you kind of going and putting yourself out there and telling the story?
Excellent question. Thank you for asking that question. I came back with a compulsion. I should tell your audience that I died ice climbing in 1980. I kept my mouth shut for about 20 years about it because I didn't, for the very reason that I told you a minute ago, societal and religious pressures for having this kind of experience. I didn't want to be seen as crazy. But from the moment that I came back, I had this deep compulsion to be a conduit, a communicator, a proclaimer of the reality of love and delight that awaits us when we die. It's my job, basically. Even though I didn't talk about it for 20 years, I lived it every single day of my life. It never goes away. It's not something that happened in my past. It is that, but it's something that is always present here and now to me. And I know that I'm going to die. I've died twice so far. I had a heart attack in 2015. And I know that my time here is limited. And so I've got a certain amount of time to be able to try to help other people speak about their near-death experiences, to bring it into the public square, but also to provide a space for people who have mystical experiences to bring it into the public square. So, and the other thing is that every time I tell the story, I go back there. So for me, I re-enter that space because one of the after effects of mystical experience is it leaves this noetic knowledge, is a way to talk about it. In the West, the word used to be wisdom. And this wisdom is a doorway back in. And so it left a mark on me, and I enter back into the space, not fully because I can't go back there as long as I'm here in this physical form, but I get to go back into that space again and re-experience a portion of the bliss and peace. So it feeds me. And so because it feeds me, I tell it as often as I can because I get something out of it. I do. I get to remember who I am.
That's beautiful. Is there a part of it that when you're getting yourself back there in the retelling that is painful or that takes something out of you for that day?
It was traumatic for me. I went back to where I died ice climbing in Alberta, Canada, on this place called Lower Weeping Wall, which is north of Calgary, some distance, a couple hours. And until I went back there in 2016, and faced my trauma. It left me with PTSD. I couldn't tell my story without crying. I was like an emotional wreck, and sometimes like right even now it kind of comes back up on me because the trauma of the terror of the night. But once I faced that shadow part of myself, the traumatic, by going back to exactly where I died and calling my soul back as a Native American elder who guided me through this process, helped me do. It's not as painful as it used to be, not nearly.
Wow. Okay. Please, if it's okay, I know it's
sure, no, it's
a big
good
thing to share, and we so appreciate you investing the time and energy here to do it, and would love to, for you to share the story.
Thanks, Jason. I'll keep it fairly tight in the interest of time. But I was an undergraduate on national student exchange from UMass, University of Massachusetts, Amherst, to Montana State University in Bozeman. And I went on this year exchange partly to go backpacking and I was on the National Ski Patrol, and so I got a volunteered position at Bridger Bowl, which is this big mountain in Bozeman. So I went to go out west to go ski and to go backpacking in the wilderness areas. I went all over the place, all over Montana. But my sister had run away when I was 14, and it disrupted my family life significantly to the point of me not wanting to be there. So I left. And come spring break, I didn't want to go back I'm from Boston area. I didn't want Boston, Massachusetts. I didn't want to go back to Boston to see my family. I just didn't want to be in that bath of turmoil. So I went to the outdoor club, and I found a fella who had planned it was a 2-week vacation, spring break, 2 weeks. So he had planned a 10-day trip, plus or minus, to British Columbia and Alberta and the Rocky Mountains in March. In Canada, 10 feet of snow on the ground, to go snow caving, backcountry ski snow caving with 70-pound packs and skiing out into the wilderness to this place called Mount Assiniboine, and then ending the whole trip with a 1-day ice climb. And I'd been a backpacker and a mountaineer. I'd been up to 14,000 feet a bunch of times and done all sorts of rock climbing and cliffs, but I'd never been an ice climber. But winter was my element. I was in the ski patrol, and I'd been winter camping since I was a kid in Boy Scouts, and I did that all the time. And I stayed in the Boy Scouts in the larger scouting long after everybody else in my peer group left, just so I could go camping. So I was an outdoorsy kind of woodsy kid. So we went on the snow caving, and we had some adventures there. We learned to trust each other because this is deep wilderness, and there's nobody going to come to rescue us. There's no such thing as cell phones at this point. There was no way to contact anybody. But we had this adventure out skiing, and then we came back into this ice climb. And I'd never been an ice climber, but Tim had been certified as a lead climber. I can't say it was the summer. It must have been the winter before. But he had just completed the course. And I was a bit of a mountain goat. I was good on my feet and very well coordinated and not afraid of heights. So we made this ascent, and I made a mistake. And to begin with, I convinced Tim to allow me to climb with an axe and a hammer. And the hammer is only this big. The axe is much bigger. If you've ever seen ice climbers, you get a big swing with the axe, and you can set the axe in the ice, and then you can let go of the handle because it has a strap to support you on the wrist with a little bead that runs down this nylon tube so that you can rest. But with the hammer, there's no resting. It's the strap is dangling off the end of the hammer, and you don't get to swing up the distance of the length of the shaft. So my climb was significantly slower than everybody else's. And Tim wasn't in favor of this, but I talked him into it. And I made this climb. The hammer was, I should say what the hammer's for. The hammer's for chipping ice so that you can set the ice screw, which has these points on it, into the ice, and then use the hammer as a lever to turn it in and turn it out. So it's a chipping, like a screwdriver sort of, or a lever like a wrench. So I'll spare all the high adventure details, which involved us getting to the top of the climb after sunset. As the sun went down, temperature dropped about 30 degrees because of the slowness of my climb. Hypothermia set in immediately. We're about 500 feet up. And through the night, hypothermia continued to advance. We knew that we were in a life or death situation where we were going to probably die. So we were going to either die staying in the place that we were at, or we were going to die fighting to get off the mountain. So we decided to fight to get off the mountain. And I probably weighed maybe 150 at the time, maybe 160. Very fit, no extraneous fat. I was, in my early 20s. We had run out of food. And so my body actually began to consume itself as the night went on because I had to force myself to keep going. So I had this amount of energy that was in my body pressed up against the continually falling temperature in the dark, making traverses and rappels on the ice, hundreds of miles from rescue. There were 2 cars that went by on the Icefields Parkway that night. And one of them actually stopped because it was the warden who came to look for us. But at that point, we were making our way down, and he thought that we were safe, and so he left. But we weren't safe, as it turns out. So we made it all the way over to the last rappel. And at this point, we're about 100 feet up or so. We're clipped into the mountain. There's iron pins epoxied in with rings and carabiners and nylon tubing and tied in a square knot, like a strap that I'm hooked into with a carabiner on my harness. So I'm not going to fall. First time all night. We're not going to. And we were traversing on these like narrow paths with the 300-foot drop to our left kind of thing. So we're now safe from falling. We're on a ledge about the size of a boardroom, half the size of a boardroom table, with a mountain in front of us, and the river off to the Saskatchewan River was right off to our left. We're maybe 100 yards from it. I'm not sure what that is in meters. And the Icefields Parkway was right down to our left too. And I had the rope. And by this point, my hypothermia had gotten to the point where, and my frostbite and my freezing, my feet had been on fire all night. Like I was walking on a hotbed of coals, because cold is like touching fire. But at this point, my feet weren't on fire anymore. My feet had gone beyond that. I had frostbite on my toes, frostbite on my fingers, frostbite on my face. I still have all my digits, so I didn't lose anything. And we had lost my cognitive functioning. It steals your brain. Cold makes you make poor decisions, takes away your reason, takes away your coordination. My face was so cold it was difficult to speak, to move my tongue, to move my lips. And we were also not talking very much in order to conserve the little energy we had left. I had mentioned a minute ago that we didn't have any food with us, so we were pushing against our own physical reserves, against the cold, against death. And by the time we were on this ledge, we were pretty much done in. And I had the rope. I tied one end to the harness, and I took the other end and I tossed it out around the side and gave the rope a yank, because there was a turn in the cliff, and we had descended down this craggy, shadowy sort of place. And I pulled on the rope, and the rope jammed up and around the corner on the very first pull. And I 3 inches, 5 inches. I pulled it again, and it set in tighter. And on the third pull, it locked completely. No more slack. And we couldn't reascend. I only had half a rope, and we had crampons on. And by this point, we were off the ice. We were on the rock, and ascending back up was definitely suicide. There's no way that we could have made that climb in the dark, without gear, with frostbite. Not survivable. So we're stuck. And it was actually around this time that the warden, who had shown up maybe an hour or two before and was watching us, this is when he left, because now we're only about 100 feet up. He's like, "See you guys. You'll be down in a minute, and I'll see you in the morning." We didn't actually talk, but that was kind of what went on. And then he drove away, and the rope got stuck, and now we're alone, and now we're going to die. And I remember thinking, I should say that I had this deep mammalian sort of survival instinct kick in, that I didn't know that I had this survival instinct. It suddenly, my brain went from driving myself forward with my mental will and repressing my terror of my situation. And I should say that Tim never lost his head the whole night. Neither did I. We both stayed steady and compressed our fear so we would remain as reasonable and calm as we could, because panic in the wilderness will kill you. So I was in an advanced state of hypothermia, and I had unzipped my coat, which is, hypothermic people often end up naked because they get hot. It feels like I felt like all the blood rushed up to my core and from my hands and my legs. And I remember thinking, I need my brain. I need my lungs. I need my heart. I don't really need my legs. I don't really need my feet. I can survive without this. But I got hot, so I unzipped my coat. Tim yelled at me, and I knew better because I was in ski patrol and I knew about hypothermia, but I didn't care. And then I had this experience of, I'm going to die here, and there's nothing I can do about it. And then this peace settled over me. My instinctual drive went away, this thing that was moving me forward. And I relaxed into it. I started thinking about my family. I started thinking about, I was raised Catholic and Orthodox. I started thinking about God. And then I began to fall asleep. And I would fall asleep like a curtain dropping, kaboom, and darkness would come, and I would fall down onto the ledge, smack my helmeted head, stand back up again, pull on the rope. And this happened a bunch of times. I don't know how many times. And then I stood up this last time. And as I stood, my vision had this big round black circle around it. And this big black circle began to collapse very rapidly as like a spotlight on a stage. And it narrowed my vision. And I remember looking around like, what is this thing going on? I'd never seen such a thing. And as it got closer and closer and closer to close, I started thinking, I must be falling asleep, but this is weird. I'd never seen this. This is weird. And as it closed to darkness, I didn't fall asleep. And I was awake, and all my pain was gone. And I didn't know what was going on. I was like, where'd the mountain go? Where am I? Why am I feeling no pain? And in front of me, where the mountain was became this huge darkness. And this huge darkness extended the size of the universe. And way, way, way far away on the far edge of this darkness, a pinprick of light appeared like a star. And this pinprick of light, white light, rushed toward me. And as it rushed toward me, it enveloped my view as it got larger and larger and larger. And as it came to me, it communicated to me telepathically without language. There was information, but no concepts, because at this point, I didn't have a brain. I was conscious, but I was out of my body. And I had this sense that I was some kind of dark shade. I don't know how to describe it. It wasn't evil. Okay. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that somehow my physical form was not body and made of a substance I can't describe to you. And as this darkness came toward me, it communicated to me, I'm taking you. And I was like, I'm not going anywhere. I don't know what's going on, but I'm staying right where I am. And it just grabbed me and plucked me. And as it pulled me right out, like a daisy out of a field, it enveloped me inside of itself. And it was gigantic. It was transparent. It was feeding me comfort, and it was showing me power. It was showing me its intelligence. And it wasn't, I call it an angel, but that brings up the idea of little cherubs and guys with wings, women with wings. It wasn't like that at all. Everything I'm saying is going to be a metaphor because I don't have any language for this that's concrete. It was like an orb of energy. And this orb of energy was much bigger than me. And I was inside of it. And I had no agency. I had no control over anything that was happening to me. I was being carried by it. I couldn't move. I didn't want to move, but I couldn't move. And it was feeding me comfort. And because it was transparent, I could see through it. And I could see out into the darkness. And I could see that we were, and understand and feel that we were moving back up the direction that it had come, up the tunnel, up the elevator shaft, however you want to conceive it. And I was bilocated. I had a second perspective. I was also like an individual eye in the darkness itself, seeing this being carrying me up to where it had entered. And when I looked for it from inside the entity, I couldn't see me, but I could see me looking at me. I was in two places at once. It was like I had a God's eye. I could see through God's eye, seeing me. And I was transported up, and my body, I had a physical form, but my physical form wasn't made out of matter or energy. I call it a light body, but that means people think about electric lamps, and it wasn't that kind of light. Or photons. I consider myself as being made of photons at that point. But there was nothing in this realm that was at all comparable to Earth and to our universe. So I have this light body in the shape of a human being, and I'm transported up. And then we get to this edge of the darkness, and the entity unfolds itself, or it pops me out. It's hard for me to know exactly what happened there, but I was popped out of this angelic being, and I became a giant orb of consciousness inside a womb of darkness. But this darkness was illuminated. It's full of paradox and contradictions. So I'm an energy form 10,000 times bigger than my human form. And my thinking is my being, is my feeling, is my sensing, is my self-understanding. I am one thing. And this one thing is energy itself. And it was as if I had 10,000 eyes, and I could see in every direction at once. And I was in this illuminated darkness, way far, far in the distance, a septillion light years away. That's just a number I'm making up. Was a layer of darkness that I couldn't penetrate with my consciousness. I couldn't see into this darkness. But inside of this womb of illuminated darkness, I knew myself as me. I understood that this consciousness had always been me. This was my true self. I had never been a human being, not really. I'd been visiting a human being, living as one, but this was me. And I understood myself as this, and I was alone in this entity, this darkness, this vast womb. But I was content and unafraid. I was in a minor state of comfort. And as I was there, the darkness itself opened. And as the darkness opened, this light poured in like a waterfall, like Niagara Falls. And it was pouring down, and it was pure white light simultaneously. So it was one white light. Simultaneously, it was 10 billion times a septillion individual particles of multicolored light, greens and blues and yellows and reds and infrareds and ultraviolets and x-rays and a million other colors and radio frequencies that we don't see with our human eye. And so it was these two things at once. It was this many and this one. And it wasn't flipping back and forth between like a leaf in the wind. It was both at the same time, which is part of the paradox of it all. It was singularness and many at once. And it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And I was seduced, attracted, desirous. I wanted it. And so with thought, as soon as I thought, oh my God, it's so beautiful, I moved, and I wasn't thinking in language either. I should clarify that. I didn't have a brain, so I didn't have any language. Language is a construct of the human brain, and no brain, pure thought. So I wasn't thinking in language, but I talk about it as if I was. So the most beautiful thing there ever I've ever seen, and I moved toward it, and as I move toward it, it moves toward me. So I move with thought, and as I come up to it, I touched it with my energy, so my being, and And I opened, and it poured inside of me. And it was the first experience of it was that it was all life. And when I say all life, I don't mean just insects and mammals and fish and birds and humans. I mean every living thing that ever existed all at once. And it was the all life, the all creator, the being of all. And it poured into me and expanded me and surrounded me. And I talk about this in a sequence, but it's timelessness. There's no time here. There's no forward and backward. It's all time at once. And I knew that it knew me. It turned its eye on me, and it saw me for my human life that I had just lived. I saw it calling me into being, calling my name, not Peter, but my soul name into existence everlastingly, always in the now. And I know that that's a little contradictory, but I can't explain that. And then I went through this, what I call in the book hell, but what I've come to reword that as purgatory, even though I'm not a Catholic anymore, because it was a transitional state in which I went through in my life review, which often happens to near-death experiencers. My life review involved being inside of the people that I had hurt in my life and being in the experience that they had while I was hurting them and feeling their rage, their jealousy, their anger, their woundedness, feeling all of their reactions to the pain that I caused them from their point of view, while simultaneously experiencing my point of view for causing them that pain. And it went through all of the pain that I'd ever given away. And so I was inside my family, mostly sisters and brothers and brother and mom and dad, but also my friends and people I didn't know, strangers I'd encountered. I experienced their pain that I gave them and juxtaposed to my rationalizations or emotional states for causing that pain. And it turned out that the pain that I had given them was 10,000 times greater than I thought it was. And it was all mine. It wasn't theirs. It accrued to me. And so I had this experience of deep, I saw how much pain I had caused in the world, and I had this experience of deep shame. And I wasn't judged. So, there was nobody up there judging me. I experienced infinite love and mercy and welcome and healing and wholeness and forgiveness while I was experiencing this shame. So I had this comparative going this way because the purity and unlimited nature of the light in comparison to my humanness. And so no one told me I was bad. I just saw that I had caused pain, and that in the divine there is no pain. And so it was a cleansing for me, because as soon as I began to listen with the ear of my heart, I began to hear the love and the forgiveness. And as I began to listen to that instead of to my own pain, I was infilled and expanded with this love. And simultaneous to that, I got to see all of humanity's equality of causing suffering. And so there was no one person's worse than the other. There was just this, everybody's less than pure. Everybody has this equality. It's like looking at our solar system from the Andromeda galaxy, 2.5 million light years away. You can't really see the difference between this star and that star. It's all very much the same. So that left me with this after effect of recognizing that other people are the way they are because of their suffering and because of their brokenness. But also I could see the light inside, see the light inside everyone. So I should speed this up a little bit. So I went through this life review. I saw myself as my original self, my original being called into being self. And I like to describe it as I was a singular photon and superpositioned. I was in sort of two places at once. I was connected to, I meant not superposition, I meant entangled. That's the word I was looking for. I was entangled with the field of photons, and this field of photons was infinitely deep, infinitely high, infinitely wide, and that was the divine being. And I was a particle of that divine being, but I was also outside of it and connected to it, not in the field itself. And so I had an individuation from it, but I was also part of it. And then I could see my next level self, which was this elongated, created soul, where I had all these other lives. I could see all these other lives I had lived, and I got to enter into a couple of them and see from the inside out. And I understood that none of those lives were me, and that I'd always been this oversoul and this photonic self as connected to the divine. And as this happened, I was expanded and expanded and expanded and got bigger and bigger and bigger and poured in with more bliss, love, beauty, peace, joy, understanding, knowledge, awe, paradise, love, light, beauty. I was bigger and bigger and bigger to this point at which I thought I would fold back into the field of photons and be no longer individuated. And as I got to this edge of expansion, I then was reduced again, and I asked, "Am I dead?" And the voice said, this voice had no sound, and it was the fullness of this dark, illuminated darkness. It was the whole thing was the divine being. And it said, "Yeah, you're dead." And I said, "Well, I can't die right now. What about my family? Mom and my dad, my sister's vanished. My mom's pretty broken. Dad's angry as a result." And as I said that, I was swept across heaven to the edge of where heaven ends and our universe begins. And I was poked out a little bit into our universe, and I saw all of our galaxies up and down and around, and could see the vast distances between them. And my attention was brought back to the origin of our universe. And I could see the same darkness that I couldn't penetrate into with my consciousness that was so far away, that out of that darkness was pouring light. And that light was emoting from the darkness, and that light was being woven into a different kind of darkness, the darkness of matter. And inside the darkness of matter, this light was the foundational energy of its creation, and it pervaded everything there was, all of the galaxies, all of the stars, all of the planets, all of the space in between the galaxies. And this divine energy, this being, was pouring out not just our universe like this constant flow, but universe after universe after universe, like coming out of this darkness and going off to these different levels, hundreds of them, thousands of them, just pouring out. And the totality of all of it became aimed at me as it spoke, "I love you. I have always loved you. You have always been well. All is well, all has been well, all will be well because of the immensity of my love for you." And all of the love of all of these universes was aimed directly at me personally. And I had this infilling of unconditional love that is so expansive that it pervades all of life, all of inanimate life, all of inanimate objects, and all of living beings. And then my attention was turned to Earth, and I could see our planet like a hologram and 8 billion people on it, 7 billion at the time. And it was live, like a live time. I could see the people doing things. Half the planet's in darkness and they're sleeping, and the other half the planet's in light and they're doing things. And inside of every single human being, there was this golden speck of light. And nobody could see this light like I could see this light inside of everybody, because in between, over covering, was this huge, thick foam, this fog, this shroud through which no one could see the light that I could see. And I understood that the fullness of the love that the divine had for me was exactly the same as it had for every single person. And the voice said to me, "All is well, all has been well, all will be well. Nothing is lost. lost to me, that all things unfold back in. And because all things unfold back in, you don't have to go back. You don't have to go back to your family. You welcome, come home to me. Because everything's good, everything's all good, and I am love itself. There's nothing to be afraid of if you stay here. And I then saw my parents, their faces A and their faces B, mom and dad, and I saw their lives without me and their lives with me if I went back. And without me, they were going to have an immense amount of suffering. And it was going to be terrible, 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 losing 2 children. And with me, there was still going to be suffering, but it wasn't going to be nearly as intense. And then I saw their deaths, not their actual physical deaths, but after their deaths, what happened to them? They were in the same place as me. I could see them. And it was only going to be that much time. Because where I was, it was timelessness. If I had just waited a moment, they would have been there. But I could see that they were going to suffer in their lives. And so I said, do I have to stay here? And the voice said, no, you don't have to stay here. I want you to stay, but you don't have to stay. And I said, well, if I go back to help my parents, can I come back here to this bliss? And the voice said, yes. And I said, well, then I choose life. And the voice said, you won't live your life, and threw me out. And as I went out, I had to make a choice of the kind of life I was going to live. And there were all these doorways in front of me, and I had to make this instantaneous choice of the life that I would have. And I chose a life that was in the light, but not in the intensity of the light, sort of in the just outside the main beam of a flashlight of light, where it's a little bit of residual light. And I went down this tunnel, and in this tunnel, there were all these doorways that led to all the other tunnels from all the other doorways. And they were all choices that I could make in my life. And then I was back outside my body, looking at it dangling off the cliff. And I could see this person, turned out to be Tim, of course, bending over my body and shaking my body and screaming and yelling, but I couldn't hear the sound. I was then pierced back into the physical body, and then my brain came back online. And I opened my eyes, and Tim was screaming and yelling, don't die, don't die, don't die, don't die. And then he could see my eyes open. He's like, oh my God, you were dead, you were dead. He didn't actually say, oh my God, because he was an atheist. You were dead, you were dead. If you were going to die, I was going to die. And then it took me a while to come to myself, to my human self, and understand who I was. And from that point on, I became an entirely different person. My career choices changed. My graduate school program that I was going into, that changed. The direction of my life, my relationship with my family, everything, the whole world was an entirely different space for me. And I'll end it there. It's a lot more to it, but that's as quick as I could tell it.
Wow. And you tell it so well. Thank you. And I appreciate that. Yeah, I know in your book you said on the other side there is no thing. Everything on this side in the world in which we live is a thing. Over there, nothing is a thing. There is no thing. Language cannot describe it. Language cannot contain it. Yet you speak so eloquently using language to describe it. Thank you for sharing that. It's incredible to me that you, even after all of that and then coming back, that you guys found a way to survive and get off the actual mountain. I mean, because going back, but you're still stuck up there. You're having to process all of this, but you can't really process it because now you have to survive, and all of this incredible experience just happened. At that point, did you feel like because you were sent back that I don't know how it's going to be okay, but somehow I'm going to get off this mountain?
No, I didn't even know who I was when I first came to. I didn't know who I was, who Tim was, what was going on. It took me a while for my brain to be able to comprehend the world I was in. But I was also wondering on my interior what had just happened to me. How did I end up back here again? Why is this world full of suffering? I was in this place of healing and no suffering. There was no suffering at all. And now I'm back inside this body and it's full of pain. And so I was sort of confused. But this time when I fell, I'd fallen asleep a bunch of times, but this time I kind of fell off the cliff. And so I think, and this is people that are like, well, how did you get down? Well, the rope came free. After this, I fell, and the rope came free. And whether that was some kind of miracle or whether it was physics, more likely physics. So the angle of my fall probably pulled the rope in a different direction, and the rope came free. So we just descended. And because the car was right across the street with the tent in it, and Tim came from a very wealthy family. He had all the right gear. He had an Arctic tent, Arctic rated, which had a chimney in it and a vent so we could fire up the stoves inside the tent without asphyxiation. So that's what we did. We fired up both of our stoves, and we climbed into our sleeping bags, and we made warm tea, and we brought our temperatures up gradually over a period of time until we could get into the car with the heater on. And that's how we did that. And I was lost in the world. I came back a mess because I didn't understand the world anymore. I couldn't understand why I had to eat, why I had to move, why I had pain. I couldn't understand why I had to use language to speak. It was all very confusing to me. It took me a long time to figure it out.
Why does there have to be so much suffering? Why does there have to be child abuse and wars? And, I'm talking from a divine being perspective, let's say. We know why these things happen because humans have disagreements and people are complicated and all of this. But after your experience and coming back, why?
Well, the question could be asked about black holes in the center of every galaxy. So science is telling us is a black hole, and this black hole in the center of all these galaxies is eating planets, whole planetary systems, star systems. Is just sucking them all down. The microbes that cause disease and death, they're part of that same system. Everything is made of limitedness here. The universe, it wouldn't exist without it. If there was no suffering, we wouldn't be here. It's a part and parcel of the structure of the entire place. Why does it have to be so painful? I wish I knew the answer to that. I do know this, that in the end, there is no suffering and no pain, and that most of the tragedy, with the exception of natural disasters, humans do to each other out of selfishness and their own trauma reactions. So if a person's raised in trauma, they pass that trauma on. And so there's this self-perpetuating system of abuse and violence and war and terrible things that humans do to each other. It's all rooted in the selfishness of our own need, the reflection of ourselves. We see ourselves instead of looking into ourselves to find the divine part of ourselves. I wish it wasn't that way, but it is. And I don't really ask why anymore. I know this is going to sound strange, but no stranger than anything else I said today, that I came back with this understanding of my temporality here. I know that I am just passing through. And so even though I continue to suffer, as everybody else does, I've had broken bones and I've lost people in my life and all the things that happen to us as human beings. I know that it's totally temporary and I'm out of here. And so I'm pretty thankful that I don't have to stay here forever, because this place is pretty harsh. It's like I call it a beautiful hellscape. It's really beautiful. And there's some great things that happen here in this world, but it's pretty hellish. And instead of, shaking my fist, why'd you make it this way? I instead try to go deep inside myself and find that portal, that opening, that light that is inside of me, and live inside that space and bring that into the world. And if all the people who had mystical experiences that we were talking about in the beginning, if they all lived in that space, maybe the world would be a different place. Maybe we would have a lot more peace, a lot more love, a lot more cooperation, a lot less selfishness, a lot less egoic action of greed, of power dynamics, humans are pretty narcissistic as a species.
I know you're tight on time here. No obligation, but perhaps we can schedule a follow-up at some point I have so many more questions and things I want to talk to you about, but I know you got to run. Do you want to share with everybody where they can find your work or the best place to go? Loved the book, by the way. You can mention that again as
Thank
well.
you. I'm at peterpanagore.love, peterpanagore.love. I have a little YouTube channel, and I work on that. So you can reach out to me. I'm very communicative, and I'd love to come back on with you, Jason. I'm sorry I had to run this morning, but I'd be happy to meet you whenever you wish. So count me in.
Thank you. I so appreciate your willingness to share and take your time to do this. Can you leave us with something here as we close out this episode? We'll call it, but we're going to get a part 2 in here for you at some point. Is death something we should think about every day? I mean, not everybody has had a near-death experience. Obviously, we've just heard yours. In terms of, I find death to be a motivator for life, and I often think about it as like I'm morbidly happy, right? Like I think about it quite a bit, but in a way that kind of motivates me and inspires me to live my best life. Do you have any thoughts around that?
Oh, I sure do. I came back thinking I'm going to have as much fun as I possibly can in my life. And so that's the way I live my life, which is why I've widely traveled and go on as many adventures locally as I possibly can, because why not? I could have a lot of fun. And so that's what I do. So enjoy it. I use my knowledge to have the best time that I possibly can while I'm here, because it is kind of a hellscape. So enjoy your life, travel, go for adventure, live with gusto, have some grit. What other sayings? But mostly love, love, love. That's really what it's all about. Love is the only treasure you get to carry with you across that divide.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Jason. Peace to you.
There you have it. And we did get Peter back for a second podcast, and I'll publish that one as the next episode. So you get to hear that right away. I'm not going to make you wait. If you want more, you're going to hear about his second near-death experience. The guy has had 2, which is absolutely mind-blowing. And some more thoughtful questions that we'll pick up with in the next episode. So I hope you enjoyed that. And what a tale. I mean, he tells it so well. And I love this quote from his book. Peter said, quote, "Dying was hard, but death was beautiful," end quote. I found comfort in that quote. I do find comfort in that quote. And I want to leave you with one last thing. I think it's healthy to think about our deaths. Maybe I do it on a daily basis. Probably not a daily basis, but quite often. And I just think as a reminder, you can use that as a motivator. It really is the ultimate motivator. So anyway, I would love your feedback on this, because it's a bit of a different episode than we normally cover. And if you have any thoughts, you can leave me a voicemail. You can drop me an email, jason@zerototravel.com. And if you haven't done so, you can sign up for our newsletter over at zerototravel.com/newsletter. That is free. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Peace and love to you and yours. Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by zerototravel.com. Ideas and advice to make your travel dreams a reality.